Hello and welcome to Nithrania YouTube channel. You're watching another episode of the Game in a Nutshell series designed for explaining the board game rules. My name is Branislav Berec, and in this video we're going to learn how to play Ark Nova from Matthias Wick, published by Feuerland. To set the game up, first place this coffee break token on this break track on the space matching your current number of players in the game. I'm going to set up the 3-player game. Shuffle these 9 bonus tiles and randomly place one of them face up on each of these 4 spaces on the game board. Don't place any tokens on these pre-printed spaces. Then you can return the remaining tokens back to the box. Shuffle all these zoo cards and place the stack face down on this space on the game board. Then draw 6 cards from the top of the deck and place them face down on each of these folder spaces. Place the 2 organizers next to the game board with all the tokens and tiles as a general supply. Then place this association board nearby with enough room above and below the board for additional cards. Place 1 partner zoo of each continent and 1 university tile of each type on the designated spaces. Shuffle these base conservation project cards and draw the 3 topmost cards and place them face up on these spaces below the association board. Only in a 4-player game you would draw 4 cards. Keep the deck of the base conservation cards nearby, it may be needed during the game. Only in a 2-player game, take 6 tokens of the unused color and place 3 of them on these 3 spaces in the left column of this donation area on the association board, and the remaining 3 tokens on the conservation cards, 1 in the rightmost space on this rightmost card, 1 on the leftmost space on the leftmost card, and 1 in the middle space on the middle card. Since I'm demonstrating a 3-player game, there are no starting tokens here. Then shuffle the final scoring cards and place them near the association board as well. Then each player takes a map, and for the first game it's recommended to use the map A. All these A maps are identical. There is another identical set of maps 0, but these are slightly more difficult to play. Or you can take a random numbered map. These are all unique and each of them has some special ability. I'm going to use the map A, which also has a special ability here. It's the same special ability for everyone. You have to place a 3-space enclosure on the indicated space on the map. Then take 1 set of action cards and place them with this blue side up under these spaces on your map. With the animals action card in the first slot, all the remaining cards can be placed randomly. Then choose a color and take all the components of that color. Place 7 cubes, 7 tokens on these spaces on your map. 3 association workers lying down on these spaces, and then the remaining 1 standing up on this notepad area. Place all the remaining tokens nearby in your personal supply, and then each player places 1 of their counters on the first space of the reputation track, 1 counter on the starting space of the conservation points track, and randomly determine the starting player who places their counter on the 0 space of this appeal track. And then the turn order continues clockwise. The second player places their counter on the first space, space number 1 of the appeal track, 3rd player on the space number 2, and 4th player would be on the space number 3. Then each player takes 8 zoo cards, 2 final scoring cards, and 25 starting money. Keep the cards hidden from other players. Unlike many other games, you keep both of these final scoring cards. You will only discard one of them later in the game. Now look at your zoo cards and choose 4 of them to keep and 4 will be discarded. And when choosing which cards to keep, look at the icons in the top right corner of the card and try to keep the cards which have the same icon as these base conservation project cards. You may also look at the top left corner of the card where you can find the requirements or prerequisites, so make sure you don't keep the cards where you are not able to meet those requirements early in the game. Also, make sure you have at least 1 sponsor card which has this icon in the top left corner. All the discarded cards are placed on this discard pile, which is face up, but players are not allowed to search through the deck. Only now you can reveal all the 6 cards on the game board. And that's the end of the setup. In Ark Nova, players take turns, starting with the first player and then continuing in a clockwise direction until the game ends. On your turn, you have to choose one of your action cards, shift it down, perform that action, and the number of the position of the card determines the strength of that action. Then you will take the card, put it to the first slot and shift all the remaining cards to the right. Then it's the next player's turn. You must be able to perform the action of the card, otherwise you may not choose that action. And if you cannot perform or you don't want to perform any of those actions, you can simply choose to take this X or a plus token. However, you still have to choose one of the cards, place it to the slot number 1 and shift all other cards to the right. These X tokens are used to increase the strength of the action. You can use as many as you want during one action, but you can have maximum 5 in total on this notepad area. I will obviously cover all those actions in a detail, but very quickly, with the cards action you will gain more zoo cards, with the build action you will build enclosures in your zoo, with animals you will play the zoo cards and you will place animals in those enclosures. With the association action you will use your association workers to perform actions on this association board. You will take these partner zoo tokens or university tokens, or you can support these conservation projects and score these conservation points. With the sponsor action you can play the sponsor cards into your zoo, into your area, which have some ongoing effects. And later in the game, when you upgrade those actions to the other side, the purple side, those actions are even more powerful. With certain actions you will move this break token, and when it reaches the end of the break track, you will perform the administration phase called the break. You will check your hand limit and discard the cards if needed. You will remove these tokens from your player board. You will return the association workers back to your player board. You will update the cards in the display and gain income, and then reset the break token. Over the course of the game, you will score these appeal points, these brown numbers, usually by placing animals into your zoo. And you will also score these conservation points, mostly by supporting the conservation projects. Then when any player in the game has their appeal counter and the conservation counter in the same conservation area, that's this green area, the end of the game is triggered. When all other players finish their turns, all players will have a chance to score their final scoring cards and also other endgame scoring effects. And then the player with the highest positive difference, which means their counters have passed each other, wins the game. Mathematically, it's just the highest total sum of the conservation points and the appeal points, so it's the sum of both tracks together. Now in this section of the video I'm going to explain all the action cards in more detail, and we will start with the cards action. First, there's a keyword on the card saying break 2. That means you have to move the break token 2 spaces to the left. When it reaches the end of the track, you will trigger the break procedure, which I'm going to describe later in the video. Then you may either draw the cards from the deck or snap. First, look at the strength of the action and then consult this small table to see what your options are. The first row of this table indicates how many cards you can draw. The second row indicates how many cards you must discard, and the third one indicates whether you can or cannot snap the card. You draw the cards from the top of the draw deck and then place them into your hand. If you would play the action from the third position, after drawing the cards you would have to discard one card. The card you discard doesn't have to be necessarily the one from those you just drawn. It can be any card from your hand. At this point there is no limit to the number of cards in your hand. That limit is only checked during the break. Then only when you play this action with a strength of 5 or more, you can snap a card. With snapping, you may take any card from the display. You only take one card, but it can be any card and you put it into your hand. As a general rule, you don't refill that empty space immediately, you only do that at the end of your turn. To refill the display, slide the cards to the left and then draw the new card or cards to refill the display. When you manage to upgrade your card to the advanced version, you may draw the cards not only from the deck but also within your reputation range from the display. Your reputation range is determined by the position of your marker on this reputation track. In this example, the reputation range of the yellow player are the first two cards. If the counter would be somewhere in this area, the reputation range would be 3 cards, and so on. Remember, when you draw the cards from the display, don't refill those spaces immediately, you will only refill them at the end of your turn. Furthermore, with the advanced version of the card, you may snap a card when the strength of the action is 3 or more. With the build action, you may build one enclosure of the maximum size equal to the strength of your action, and you have to pay 2 money for each space of that enclosure. So for example, with a strength of 3, you may build the enclosure 3 spaces large. For that, you would pay 6 money. The available buildings are kiosk with a size 1, which increases the income during the break. Then pavilion, again with the size 1, which increases your appeal immediately. Standard enclosures of the size 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5 spaces. And then this petting zoo, which is a special enclosure for specific animals, and you are limited to just one petting zoo in the entire zoo. When you build your first enclosure, it must be adjacent to the edge of the map. Note that on this map A, the first enclosure has already built as part of the setup. On any other map, you wouldn't have any enclosure on the map yet, so the first one must be adjacent to the edge of the map. All other enclosures you build must be adjacent to your existing enclosures. This pre-printed kiosk is also part of your zoo, so in this example I could also build this enclosure like this. Newly placed kiosk must be at least 3 spaces away from all other kiosks in your zoo. When you build these standard enclosures, place them with this empty side up. You may only build on these empty spaces, you may never build on the water spaces or these rock spaces. Naturally, you may never build beyond your zoo, beyond the edges of your zoo, and you may never overlap other buildings. You must always cover just the empty spaces. Whenever you cover these yellow spaces, gain those bonuses immediately. You can find a description of all those icons at the back of the rulebook. In order to build on these spaces marked with these icons, you must have your build action already upgraded. That's why these icons on the map. With upgraded version, you can build more than one building with one action. The maximum total size of those buildings is the strength of your action. However, you have to build different buildings. So, for example, with a strength of 4, I would not be allowed to build 2 standard enclosures with the size of 2. I could do 1 enclosure with the size of 2, 1 enclosure with the size of 1, and let's say 1 pavilion. Or I can build 1 standard enclosure with the size of 1 and the other with the size of 3, and so on. In addition, if the strength of your build action is 5 or more, there are 2 new special buildings available. This is a reptile house and this is a large bird aviary. Similar to petting zoo, you're only limited to just one of each of these buildings in your zoo. After you build these special buildings, if you have suitable animals in your zoo in the standard enclosures, you may move them from those standard enclosures to this special building. You can only do it now immediately, you will not have a chance to do it later in the game. I will explain more on that during the animals action. When you build more than one building, you build them one after the other, so you can take the bonus from one action to use it to build another building. When you manage to completely cover your entire zoo, obviously excluding water spaces and rock spaces, you will gain 7 appeal points immediately. One last note, the game includes also these kind of special buildings. These can only be built as the effect of the sponsor cards during the sponsor actions, and when you build these buildings, apply the standard rules for the placement. With the Animals action, you can play animal cards from your hand. You can play 1 or 2 cards based on the strength of your action, and if the strength is 1, you may actually not play any card at all. To play a card, first you need to meet the conditions in the top left corner. If you do, then pay the cost, here it's 16 money, and place the animal in an empty enclosure, and then flip that enclosure to indicate that it's now occupied. And then you will execute the effects of the card and gain the appeal points. Now let's go through that procedure in more detail. So first, check the conditions on the card. This number in the brown hex indicates the minimum size of the enclosure that must be empty in your zoo. You simply have to have an empty enclosure for that animal. Then the second number is the money you have to pay, and then below that you will find symbols you must have in your zoo. This one, for example, is the requirement to have the partner zoo token of the same region as the region on the card. So here we would have to have the American partner zoo. In this example, you have to have at least 2 scientific symbols, which you can find, for example, on the university token. And in this example, you have to have at least 3 symbols of Africa, which can be a combination of the partner zoo token and the symbols in the top right hand corner of the previously played cards. The symbol on the card you are trying to play is not active yet. You can find the explanation of all the icons in this icon overview. If any game effect refers to your zoo, it is all your cards you played so far. Those are the animal cards and the sponsor cards, and you count the icons in the top right corner of those cards, and your player board and your map, including these partner zoo tokens and the university tokens. So, if you meet all the requirements, then pay the cost, which in this case is 12 money, but if you have the partner zoo token of the same region as depicted on the card, for each such icon in the top right corner, reduce the price by 3. So here from 12 it would be just 9 money. Note that in this example the cost will be reduced by 6 money because there are 2 icons of the matching partner zoo. Then place the animal in an empty enclosure in your zoo. The minimum size of the enclosure is determined by the number in the brown hexagon. If there's any rock or water symbol next to that number, it indicates that the enclosure must be adjacent to a rock space or a water space. So, if you have the matching enclosure, flip that enclosure to the occupied side. These petting zoo animals with this icon can only be placed in these special petting zoo enclosures. This number over here indicates how much space those animals occupy in that enclosure, and you place that many tokens in that enclosure. And when you have your animals action upgraded and you already have the large aviary or a reptile house, if you play an animal card which can be placed in such a special building, you may choose whether you place that animal in the standard enclosure or in that special enclosure. If you play an animal card which shows 0 in that special building, you can place it in that special building even if that building is already fully occupied. So, after paying the cost and placing the animal in an empty enclosure and flipping that enclosure, only now the card is officially in your zoo and you may execute the effect of the card, including scoring the appeal points. Some cards may also give you the conservation points or even the reputation points. In both cases, move your counters on the respective tracks. And for the full description of all those effects on the cards, refer to the glossary. If you can play 2 animal cards during the same action, similar to Enclosures, play those cards one after another, fully resolve one card before you play another card and fully resolve the second card. Now, as I briefly mentioned during the build action, if you build a special building like aviary or the reptile house, if you already have animals which can be accommodated in that special building, and those animals are now in the standard enclosures, you may now and only now move those animals from those standard enclosures to the special building. To do that, for each animal, unflip the smallest standard enclosure of the corresponding size that meets all the potential requirements. Here it will be this standard enclosure with a size of 2. And mark the special building with the number of tokens indicated on the card. So for the second animal, we would flip this 4 spaces large enclosure and place another token to the large aviary. When you upgrade your animal's action, you can play the animal cards from your hand or even from within the reputation range. That means that you may actually play the card directly from the display. When you do, you have to pay additional money equal to the number shown on the folder. Here it would be 2 money. And again, you would refill the empty space only at the end of your turn. Furthermore, if you play this action with a strength of 5 on the upgraded side, you gain 1 reputation, which you get right at the start of your turn, and that may actually increase your reputation range. With the association action, you can perform 1 association task with the maximum strength equal to the strength of the action. To do that, you need to have a free worker here on the notepad. Take that worker and place that worker on one of the association tasks with the strength equal or lower than the strength of the action. Then you can carry out the action of that task. If you already have a worker on that task, to perform that same task again, you would have to place 2 of your workers there. And then if you have 3 workers on a specific task, you are no longer able to perform that task until you get those workers back during the break. There can be any number of workers on each association task, and the workers of other players have no effect on your workers. When you place your worker on the association task with a strength of 2, you may increase your reputation by 2. When you gain reputation, move your marker on the reputation track. When you reach any bonus spaces, gain those bonuses immediately. The position of your marker determines the so-called reputation range for certain game effects. In order to move to the space number 10 and further on, you have to have the card's action upgraded. So your card with the card's action must be upgraded to the purple side. When you are on the space number 15 on the reputation track and you gain additional reputation, for each reputation point you are not able to move further on, gain 1 appeal point. When you place your worker on this association task, you may take one of the available partner zoo tokens and place it on the lowest empty space on your player board. If you cover any bonuses, take those bonuses immediately. In this case, you can upgrade one of your action cards. You can upgrade any of your cards, but even if you upgrade the current active card, the upgraded effect is only available from your next action, so you would not be able to take the effect of this action right now. To place a partner zoo token on the 3rd space of this track, you need to have your association action upgraded. You can have maximum 4 partner zoo tokens over the course of the game, and you may never take the same token twice. This -3 number here is a reminder that when you play an animal card with the same continent token, you get a discount of 3 money. Again, after taking the token, don't refill the empty spaces. That will only happen during the break. When you place your worker to this association task, similar to partner zoo tokens, take one of the available tokens and place it on the lowest empty space on your player board. If you cover a bonus, take that bonus immediately. If you gain reputation, increase your reputation immediately. And again, you may not have the same tokens twice, and don't refill the empty spaces yet. When you place your worker on this task, you may either support one of the projects already in play, or play one of your projects from your hand and support that project immediately. I will cover both cases in more detail now. When you decide to support one of the conservation project which is already in play, you may only do it if you fulfill the condition on that project card. For example, here you need to have 2, 4 or 5 birds icon in your zoo. Just to reiterate, you count the icons in the top right corner of the cards you played and icons on the university tokens and the partner zoo tokens. So if you fulfill the condition, take one of the tokens from the left side of your player board and place it on the project card. If you fulfill more than one condition, you can choose which one you take. The number here indicates the minimum number of icons you need to have. After choosing the space, score the indicated number of conservation points. When moving on the conservation track, each green space is 1 conservation point, and when you reach or pass this bonus space, take one of the bonuses immediately. When you reach this space, you can choose one of the bonuses on the tokens, and when you do, remove the token from play. And if all the tokens have been removed already, you can always choose this pre-printed bonus. When you reach or pass this space number 10, all players must discard one of their endgame scoring cards. Don't forget to take the bonus from your player board from the space you took the player token from. These are just one-time immediate bonuses. These ones are immediate bonuses, and you also gain them during each break during the income phase. When supporting the project, you may support either these base conservation projects or projects played by other players previously, but with one action you may only support one project. Furthermore, you can only support each project once, and obviously you can only place the token on empty spaces. You may not place them on spaces occupied by other cubes. The other option when performing this task is to play the conservation project and support that project immediately. When playing the conservation project card, place it to the leftmost space and shift other cards to the right. And if the card gives you a reputation point, score those points immediately, and then support that project immediately following the standard rules. The number of project cards above the association board is limited by the number of players in the game. So in a 3-player game, only 3 cards can be placed here. And if any player would play a new card, it would be placed in the leftmost space. The remaining cards will be pushed to the right. And if there are any project cards which are pushed beyond the limit, those are removed from the game. The players don't lose those conservation points from those cards, however, other players simply lose the chance of scoring the card as well. Return the cube to the general supply of that player. The base conservation projects are permanent, they are never moved away. When you get your association action upgraded, you may perform more than one association task with one action. However, the total value of those tasks must be equal or lower than the strength of your action. Those tasks must be different, and you may also use this donation area. For each of these tasks, you obviously need a free worker, and anytime you gain a new worker, for example with the effect like this, take that worker from the bottom of the track, but you don't need any worker for this donation task. So if you have the association action with a strength of 5, you can for example use 2 workers and perform the tasks with the level 2 and then level 3, and then also the donation with the level 0. Or you may simply perform the conservation support project with the level 5 and then perform the donation. To perform the donation, you must perform at least one other task on the board. To perform a donation, take one of the tokens from your personal supply and place it on the first empty space in this donation area, and for that you gain 1 conservation point. In addition, pay the indicated cost in money, which is returned to the general supply. Again, since all the tasks must be different, you may not take the donation task twice with one action. When all spaces on this donation area are occupied, this last space is always available and you don't need to place the token there. And finally, when you play the conservation task, as indicated at the bottom of the card, you may play the conservation cards directly from the display from within your reputation range. Again, follow the same rules and don't refill the empty space until end of your turn. As an additional cost, pay the amount of money equal to the number on the folder. With the sponsor action you have two options, and the first one at the bottom is very easy. You move the break token number of spaces equal to the strength of the action, and then you gain money equal to the strength of the action. So here you would move the break token 4 spaces and then gain 4 money. The second option is to play one sponsor card from your hand with the maximum level equal to the strength of the action. So for example, to play the sponsor card with level 4. When playing the sponsor cards, if they have any requirements, they follow the same rules as the requirements on the animal cards, but you don't have to pay any money for the sponsor cards. After playing the card, execute the effect on the card immediately, and if that effect refers to an icon which is also shown on that card, count that icon as well. In this example, anytime this reptile icon is played in any zoo, including your own one, you gain 3 money, so you would gain 3 money even for this card. Some sponsor cards may have immediate effects and also the endgame scoring conditions. In addition, some of the sponsor cards allow you to place a building in your zoo. Placing those buildings follows the same standard rules, and don't forget to score your appeal points. With the upgraded action, when you perform the break, you gain twice as much money. And when you perform the standard action, you may play more than one sponsor card, but the total value of those sponsor cards must be equal or lower than the strength of the action. In addition, you may also play the cards directly from the display, again from within your reputation range, and don't forget to pay the additional cost. If you cannot or don't want to play any of the actions on your cards, you may simply take one of these X tokens, but you still have to choose a card and move it to the left to the first slot and shift all other cards to the right. You can have maximum 5 of these tokens, and when you use them, they increase the strength of the action. You may use any number of those tokens at the same time, so with these 2 tokens, the build action would have the strength of 6. After using, discard those tokens. When you move the break token to the end of this break track, you trigger the break. First, you have to fully complete your turn, and then you perform the break procedure. First, the player who triggered the break gains 1 X token. Then, check for the hand limit if you have more than 3 cards in your hand, or more than 5 if you have the corresponding university token. Discard any cards in excess to the discard pile. Then, if you have any of these tokens on your action cards, you have to discard them now. I will talk about these tokens at the end of the video, but if you still have them on your cards, when the break is triggered, discard those tokens. Then reset the association board. Take all your workers from the association board and place them back on your player board, and then refill the empty spaces with the corresponding tokens. Then, step number 4, replenish the display. First, as indicated by these icons, during the coffee break, discard these 2 cards to the discard pile, slide all the remaining cards, and draw new cards from the top of the deck and place them on the empty spaces. And then, step number 5, gain income. First, gain income from the appeal track. In this case, the yellow player would gain 17 money. Then for each kiosk on your player board, you gain 1 money for each adjacent building other than empty enclosures. So in this case it would be 1, 2, 3 coins. Then gain income from all the empty spaces on your player board from this area. Here you would gain 5 additional money. And you may also gain income from some of the sponsor cards. Here it would be additional 3 money. Then reset the break token to the starting position, and then the next player in the player order continues the game. The end of the game is triggered when any player has the appeal marker and the conservation marker in the same conservation point area, or if these markers pass each other. When that happens, all other players, except for the player who triggered the end of the game, have 1 final turn. After that, the game is over and proceed to final scoring. During the final scoring, you may score additional conservation points from the endgame final scoring cards and also these endgame conditions on some of the sponsor cards. If the endgame is triggered but no player has reached the number 10 space on the conservation track, each player has to discard one of their final scoring cards now. Then move the conservation counters to the lowest number in that conservation area, and do that for all players. And then the final score for each player is the difference between the appeal score marked by the appeal counter and the appeal score marked by the conservation counter. In this example, it is 84 minus 73, that's 11. Similarly, we have 83 minus 76 for the yellow player. And for the red player, we have 74 minus 85, which is negative 11. The player with the highest positive difference is the winner. When setting the game up for a solo game, prepare 3 base conservation projects, but don't place any token on them as you would do in a 2-player game. Then don't use the break token at all, but use this solo board and place 7 tokens of unused color in the left column like this, and start the game with 20 appeal points. If you want to make the game more difficult, start the game with 10 appeal points, and for a brutal difficulty, start the game with 0 appeal points. Then there are a few changes for the gameplay. Anytime you play a card with this interactive effect, don't use the effect on the card, instead use the effect on this blue stripe. Then you can have maximum 2 projects above the association board. If you play another one, you have to remove the rightmost one from the game. Anytime you take an action with the break icon, ignore that break, but you still gain the money. Then at the end of your turn, take the topmost token on the solo board and move it to the right column. When you do it with the last token, you uncover this break icon, take the topmost token from the solo board and place it on the topmost empty spot in the donation area. Then move all other tokens back to the left column. Then immediately perform the break procedure using the standard rules. With one exception, you don't take the X token for triggering the break. The end of the game is triggered when you only have 2 remaining tokens on the solo board and you move the bottommost to the right column. Don't perform the break procedure, but perform the final scoring immediately. You win the game if you have at least 0 victory points. In this last section of the video, I'm going to cover some of the most frequent keywords in the game. The first one is the after finishing keyword. After finishing your turn means that after you take the action, you move the action card to the first spot, and that's the end of your turn, and now you can perform any after finishing effects. So for example, if you can move any card to the first slot after finishing your move, you do it now and you take any card and move it to the first slot. To fulfill the condition of some project cards, you have to release one animal into the wild. Here it has to be one animal with the Asia icon. To release an animal, you have to discard a card with the matching requirements. You would then reduce your appeal by the amount shown on the card. However, if you would discard a card like this, you only reduce the appeal points, you don't reduce your conservation or the reputation points. Then find the smallest enclosure, occupied enclosure in your zoo. In this case the minimum size is 2, so the smallest is size of 3, and flip it to the empty side. Then in this example, based on the enclosure size, you support the project on the corresponding space. You have to exactly match the requirements here, so with this animal, it's the size of the enclosure 5. You would only be able to place a token on this space, not on 3 or 2-. If you release an animal which can be placed both in the special building or in the standard enclosure, if there are tokens, corresponding number of the tokens in that special building, you have to remove those instead of flipping the standard enclosure. Only if that special building wouldn't have enough tokens, then you can unflip that standard enclosure. Some animals have interactive effects which are indicated with this yellow and red icon. There are 4 types of these effects, and if you don't want to play with these interactive effects, instead of the effect on the card, you can use the effect at the bottom of the card which is intended for a solo play. If you play an animal card which gives you this action keyword, in this case action association, You can perform that action after you finish the current action. So after you complete your current animals action, you may perform the association action in this case, which means you move the card down, perform the action, and move that card to the first slot under your player board. And finally, when you gain this multiplier token, you immediately place it on one of your cards, and the next time you take that action, you take that action 2 times in a row, which means you fully resolve the action with the current strength, and then again, you resolve that action with the same strength. Only then the action card is moved to the first slot under your player board and the multiplier token is discarded. So that's how you play Ark Nova. If you would have any questions or comments, please put them into the comment sections below. I'll be more than happy to answer as many as I can. If you like the series, please subscribe. You can even support the channel on the Patreon page. My name is Branislav Berec. You've been watching Game in a Nutshell and hope to see you next time. I would like to thank everyone who has ever supported the channel, and especially the current supporters listed on this page. If you too would like to support the channel in creation of videos like this and other video tutorials and other content on this channel, please visit the patreon.com/Nithrania.